In the heart of Ireland, where green fields are stitched together by stone walls and winding lanes, lies the county of Roscommon. It was a place of quiet beauty, but in the spring of 1921, it was anything but peaceful. The Irish War of Independence was raging, a bitter and brutal conflict that turned neighbor against neighbor and parish against parish. The main road connecting the market town of Strokestown to the garrison town of Longford was a vital artery for the British forces. It was a lifeline for their soldiers and police, a route they used to move men, supplies, and information across a hostile countryside. For the Irish Republican Army, this same road was a symbol of occupation, a target waiting to be struck. Along this very road, just a few miles east of Strokestown, was a small, unassuming crossroads known as Scramogue. There was nothing remarkable about it. It was just a place where a smaller laneway met the main thoroughfare, flanked by a handful of buildings, a pub, a post office, and a few cottages. To a passing traveler it would have seemed like any other rural junction in Ireland. But its very ordinariness made it a perfect location for an ambush. The road here dipped slightly, creating a natural killing ground. The scattering of buildings offered ready-made cover for gunmen, and the open fields beyond provided escape routes. On March 23, 1921, this forgotten crossroads was destined to become a name etched into the history of Ireland's fight for freedom. The significance of this stretch of road cannot be overstated. For the British, controlling it meant they could project their power into the heart of Roscommon, a county that was becoming increasingly troublesome. Their lorries, filled with heavily armed soldiers and Royal Irish Constabulary officers, thundered along it daily. They were a constant, intimidating presence, a reminder of who was in charge. For the local IRA volunteers, however, every passing convoy was a challenge. It was a dare. To disrupt this flow of military traffic was to strike a blow directly at the Crown's authority. It would show the British that they were not safe, not even on the main roads in broad daylight. And so, Scramogue was chosen. It was a place where the local IRA volunteers, men who had grown up on this land, could use their intimate knowledge of every ditch, every gate, and every laneway to their advantage. They knew the rhythms of the road, the timing of the patrols, and the mindset of the soldiers who traveled it. They were fighting on their own turf, and this gave them a confidence that no amount of military training could give the British. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would send shockwaves through Roscommon and beyond, a clash that would demonstrate the growing strength and sophistication of the guerrilla war being waged in the Irish Midlands. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more content like this. The men who gathered in the fields and buildings around Scramogue Crossroads were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, shop assistants, and laborers from the local area. They were the volunteers of the North and South Roscommon Brigades of the Irish Republican Army. Led by men like Patrick Madden, they were driven by a fierce desire for Irish independence. For months, they had been engaged in a low-level guerrilla campaign, raiding police barracks for weapons, blocking roads, and gathering intelligence. They were learning the hard craft of war on the job, their training consisting of late-night drills in lonely fields and whispered instructions from more experienced commanders. The decision to strike at Scramogue was a bold one. It marked a significant escalation in their activities. Up until this point, many of the actions in Roscommon had been smaller in scale. This was to be a major set-piece ambush, requiring careful planning, disciplined coordination, and a great deal of courage. The IRA command knew that a British military convoy, which included members of the elite 9th Queen's Royal Lancers, was due to travel from Strokestown to Longford. This was their chance. A successful attack would not only yield a huge prize in terms of captured weapons and ammunition, but it would also be a massive propaganda victory, boosting morale among Republicans across the country. These volunteers were deeply embedded in the local community. They were not outsiders. They were the sons, brothers, and neighbors of the people who lived along that very road. This gave them a crucial advantage. They could move across the landscape without suspicion, gather information from sympathetic locals, and find safe houses to hide in after an attack. Their motivation was not pay or promotion, but a deeply held belief in the cause of an Irish republic. They were willing to risk everything, their freedom, their homes, and their very lives, for that cause. For them, the fight was personal, a struggle to reclaim their own land. The timing was critical. The IRA had received intelligence that a second lorry, carrying more soldiers, was scheduled to follow the first. Their plan had to account for this. They needed to strike the first lorry with such speed and ferocity that the fight would be over before the second could arrive and join the fray. This required discipline and a clear chain of command. Every man had his position, his target, and his role to play. As they lay in wait on that chilly March morning, the tension must have been immense. They were about to challenge the might of the British Empire with a collection of rifles, shotguns, and a single precious machine gun. The target of the ambush was a single Crossley tender, a type of light military lorry that was the workhorse of the British forces in Ireland. It was a common sight on Irish roads, but this particular convoy was more than just a routine patrol. On board were 9 soldiers from the 9th Lancers, a prestigious cavalry regiment of the British Army. They were heavily armed and battle-hardened. Accompanying them were 2 officers of the Royal Irish Constabulary, a police force that found itself on the front line of the conflict. But there was another more unusual element to this party: 2 IRA prisoners handcuffed and under guard being transported to Longford. The presence of the 9th Lancers showed how seriously the British were taking the situation in Roscommon. These were not inexperienced recruits. They were professional soldiers from one of the Army's most famous regiments. Their job was to escort the prisoners and to project a sense of power and control as they moved through the countryside. The lorry itself was an open-topped vehicle which made its occupants vulnerable but also gave them a clear field of fire. They would have been alert, their eyes scanning the hedgerows and cottages as they drove, knowing that danger could come at any moment. But they were confident in their superior firepower and training. A key detail in the intelligence gathered by the IRA was the expected arrival of a second lorry. This vehicle was supposed to be following close behind the first, providing reinforcement and backup. The IRA's entire plan was built around this piece of information. They had to ensure the ambush was executed with lightning speed to prevent the 2 lorries from supporting each other. However, on this particular day, fate intervened. The second lorry had been delayed back in Strokestown. It never left. The men in the first lorry were traveling alone, completely unaware that their expected backup was not coming. This simple twist of fate would prove to be catastrophic for them. So, as the Crossley tender made its way down the Strokestown-Longford road, its occupants were a mixture of soldiers, policemen, and prisoners. They were a small, isolated unit of the Crown forces, moving through a landscape that had become enemy territory. The soldiers were likely thinking of their duties, the policemen of the dangers they faced daily, and the prisoners of the grim fate that awaited them in Longford. None of them could have known that just a few hundred yards ahead, around a slight bend in the road, over 30 Irish volunteers were waiting for them, fingers resting on their triggers. The planning of the Scramogue Ambush was a masterful display of guerrilla tactics, perfectly tailored to the local terrain. The IRA commanders, using their intimate knowledge of the area, chose the site with great care. The road at Scramogue dipped into a slight hollow, meaning the approaching British lorry would be unable to see the ambush site until it was almost on top of it. This element of surprise was crucial. The IRA also knew that a large felled tree, placed across the road just around the bend, would force the lorry to a complete stop right in the center of their pre-prepared killing zone. The volunteers took up positions in strategic locations all around the crossroads. The main attacking force, including the prized Lewis machine gun, was positioned behind the thick stone wall of the local pub. This provided them with excellent cover and a clear line of fire onto the road. Other riflemen were placed in the post office and in nearby cottages, turning the seemingly peaceful buildings into fortified firing points. To block any potential retreat, a trench was dug across the road behind the ambush site, and another section of men was positioned there to cut off any escape back toward Strokestown. Concealment was everything. The men had to remain completely hidden as they waited, perhaps for hours, for the convoy to arrive. They used the natural cover of the hedgerows and the man-made cover of the stone walls. Local sympathizers played a vital role, acting as scouts and lookouts, ready to give the signal that the lorry was approaching. This was a community effort. The success of the ambush depended not just on the men with the guns, but also on the silent cooperation of the people who lived and worked in the area. Their knowledge of the land was a weapon just as powerful as any rifle. The plan was simple but deadly. Once the lorry was forced to halt at the roadblock, the machine gunner would open fire on the driver and the soldiers in the front. This was the signal for everyone else to start firing. The goal was to overwhelm the British soldiers with a sudden, massive volley of fire from multiple directions, giving them no time to react or organize a defense. The IRA commanders had thought through every detail, from the placement of the roadblock to the escape routes the men would use after the attack. It was a plan born of local ingenuity and a burning desire to hit the enemy hard. The morning of March 23rd was cold and gray. The IRA volunteers, hidden in their positions, waited with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The minutes must have felt like hours. Then, the signal came. A lookout signaled that the lorry was approaching. A hush fell over the men, as they heard the distant rumble of the engine growing louder and louder. Every man knew his job. Every eye was fixed on the bend in the road. The tension was at its breaking point. The fate of everyone present on both sides was about to be decided in a few frantic moments of violence. As the Crossley tender rounded the bend, the driver saw the felled tree blocking the road ahead. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the lorry to a screeching halt, exactly where the IRA had intended. For a split second, there was a moment of confusion among the British soldiers. Before they could even raise their rifles or comprehend what was happening, the ambush was sprung. The silence was shattered by the ferocious rattle of the Lewis machine gun firing from the pub wall. Its bullets ripped into the cab of the lorry, killing the driver instantly and hitting the officer sitting beside him. Immediately after the machine gun opened up, the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire and the blast of shotguns from all sides. The soldiers in the open back of the lorry were completely exposed, caught in a deadly crossfire. They had no cover and no time to mount any kind of effective resistance. The attack was so sudden and so overwhelming that the fight was over almost as soon as it began. Some soldiers were hit before they could even get a shot off. Others tried to return fire, but they were firing blindly at an enemy they could not see. Within a minute or two, the firing died down. The ambush had been a devastating success for the IRA. The British party had been almost completely wiped out. The lorry was riddled with bullet holes, and the scene on the road was one of carnage. The swiftness and brutality of the attack were a testament to the careful planning of the IRA and the discipline of the volunteers. They had achieved their objective with ruthless efficiency, proving that a small, well-organized guerrilla force could inflict a major defeat on a professional army. The quiet crossroads at Scramogue had been transformed into a battlefield. In the immediate aftermath of the short, sharp firefight, a sense of urgent confusion took hold among the IRA volunteers. Their plan had been built around the intelligence that a second British lorry was following close behind. They had expected to have only a few minutes to disarm the survivors, collect the weapons, and make their escape before reinforcements arrived. The commanders were shouting orders, telling their men to be quick. Every second counted. They believed another, even more dangerous fight could begin at any moment. The volunteers quickly moved onto the road to secure the site. Their primary objective was to capture the British soldiers' weapons, their rifles, revolvers, and most importantly, their ammunition, which was always in short supply for the IRA. As they disarmed the dead and wounded, their ears were strained, listening for the sound of an approaching engine. The men tasked with blocking the road to the rear were on high alert, ready to engage the second lorry and buy their comrades precious time. The entire operation was now a race against the clock, driven by the fear of that second vehicle. But as the minutes ticked by, there was only silence. The expected roar of another Crossley tender never came. The road back towards Strokestown remained empty. The IRA commanders began to realize that their intelligence had been wrong, or that something had changed. The second lorry was not coming. This realization shifted the atmosphere of the ambush site. The frantic urgency was replaced by a more deliberate and grim task of dealing with the aftermath. They had more time than they thought, but the scene before them was a brutal one. The non-arrival of the second lorry was a crucial factor in the outcome of the day. Had it arrived as expected, the story of the Scramogue Ambush might have been very different. The IRA could have found themselves caught between two enemy forces, and their successful ambush could have turned into a disastrous defeat. The delay of that single vehicle back in Strokestown, a minor logistical issue for the British Army, had handed the IRA a decisive victory. It was a stark reminder of how chance and circumstance, as much as planning and bravery, could shape the events of the War of Independence. Among the ranks of the IRA volunteers at Scramogue were men who had a unique and valuable skill set. These were Irishmen who had previously served in the British Army, many of them veterans of the Great War. They had fought in the trenches of France and Belgium, and they had been trained by the very army they were now fighting against. These ex-soldiers brought a level of professionalism, discipline, and most importantly, marksmanship to the IRA. They were, in a sense, poachers who had become the gamekeepers, using their military training for the cause of Irish independence. The role of these men in the ambush was critical. While many of the volunteers were brave and committed, they were amateurs when it came to handling weapons. The ex-soldiers, however, were expert shots. They understood how to use their rifles effectively, how to lead a moving target, and how to remain calm under fire. It was said that the man operating the Lewis machine gun at Scramogue was an ex-British soldier. His ability to direct accurate, sustained fire into the cab of the lorry in the opening seconds of the attack was a key reason for its success. He knew exactly where to aim to cause the most damage and confusion. This phenomenon of ex-servicemen joining the IRA was not unique to Roscommon, but it was a significant factor in the increasing effectiveness of the guerrilla campaign across Ireland. These men were often disillusioned after the war, returning to an Ireland that was in political turmoil. Some joined the IRA out of a sense of national duty, while others were drawn in through family or community ties. Whatever their reasons, their impact was undeniable. They helped to transform the IRA from a poorly armed militia into a more effective and deadly fighting force. The British military command was deeply troubled by the presence of their own former soldiers in the ranks of the enemy. It was a psychological blow, as well as a practical one. These men knew British Army tactics, they knew how their officers thought, and they knew the weaknesses of their equipment. At Scramogue, their deadly skill with a rifle was on full display. They demonstrated that a well-aimed shot from a trained marksman was worth more than a dozen unaimed shots from an untrained volunteer. Their contribution helped to ensure that the ambush was not just an attack, but a devastatingly effective military operation. The immediate aftermath of the ambush was grim. The IRA had won a major victory, but the cost was high. On the road lay the bodies of the British soldiers and RIC officers. Among the dead was Captain G.H. Peake of the 9th Lancers and District Inspector T.J. McGrath of the RIC. The two IRA prisoners who had been in the lorry, Michael Malooly and Patrick Moran, were also killed in the crossfire. The IRA volunteers gathered the captured weapons, a huge haul of rifles and ammunition, and quickly melted back into the countryside, leaving a scene of destruction behind them. The British response was swift and furious. As soon as news of the ambush reached the military barracks in Roscommon and Longford, patrols were sent out to hunt for the attackers, but the volunteers had vanished. Frustrated and enraged, the Crown forces turned their anger on the local community. This was the beginning of a period of official and unofficial reprisals. Homes of known Republicans and their sympathizers were burned to the ground. In the nearby town of Strokestown, soldiers and black and tans went on a rampage, terrorizing the local population. This was a common pattern in the War of Independence. An IRA attack was almost always followed by a brutal British reprisal. The violence did not end there. The ambush set off a terrible cycle of killing in the area. In the days and weeks that followed, several local people suspected of being informers for the British were abducted and executed by the IRA. The Republicans were determined to protect their security and send a chilling message to anyone who might consider cooperating with the Crown forces. This created an atmosphere of intense fear and suspicion. No one knew who they could trust. The lines between combatant and civilian became dangerously blurred, and the conflict grew more personal and more vicious. This cycle of attack and reprisal deepened the divisions within the community and made any chance of reconciliation impossible. Each act of violence from one side provoked an even more brutal reaction from the other. For the ordinary people of Roscommon, life became a daily struggle for survival, caught between the IRA's war for independence and the Crown Forces' campaign of suppression. The Scramogue Ambush, while a military success for the IRA, had unleashed a wave of retaliatory violence that would scar the county for years to come, demonstrating the terrible human cost of the conflict. The Scramogue Ambush was more than just a single, isolated event. It was a turning point that perfectly illustrates the nature of the War of Independence in rural Ireland. It showed how the conflict was not just a war between armies but a struggle that permeated every aspect of daily life. The ambush and its aftermath revealed a brutal, self-perpetuating cycle of violence. An IRA attack led to British reprisals against the civilian population, which in turn hardened local attitudes against the British and drove more young men into the ranks of the IRA. This cycle was repeated in towns and villages all across the country. In Roscommon, this pattern became the grim reality of 1921. The war was fought in the fields, on the roads, and in the towns. It was a war of intelligence and informers, of midnight raids and summary executions. The Scramogue Ambush demonstrated the growing confidence and tactical skill of the IRA, but the reprisals that followed showed the devastating power and anger of the British Empire. People were forced to choose sides, and the middle ground disappeared. A farmer driving his cart to market, a publican serving drinks, a postman delivering letters, anyone could be seen as a potential friend or foe. This constant state of fear and violence shaped the community in profound ways. It created deep and lasting bitterness, setting neighbor against neighbor. The memory of burned-out homes and the stories of men taken from their beds in the middle of the night were passed down through generations. The War of Independence was not a distant affair fought by soldiers in uniform. It was an intimate and personal struggle that tore at the very fabric of society. The events at Scramogue and the subsequent reprisals brought the harsh realities of this new kind of warfare into sharp focus for the people of Roscommon. Ultimately, the Scramogue Ambush stands as a powerful symbol of the wider conflict. It was a microcosm of the entire War of Independence. It involved local volunteers using their knowledge of the land to fight a powerful professional army. It highlighted the crucial role of intelligence and the deadly consequences of betrayal, and it unleashed a spiral of violence that consumed the lives of soldiers, policemen, and civilians alike. The story of that day on a lonely Roscommon road is the story of how a nation was forged in fire, and how the cycles of violence became an inescapable part of daily life for those caught in the struggle for Ireland's freedom.